Okay, so this morning, Lisa and I were watching CBS This Morning in bed, which is what we generally do, besides other things. And in the second hour, which they generally fill up with less important news, and today was certainly a day for a lot of news, in the second hour, they did a little promo, a little pitch for the season finale for Homeland. If you don't know, Homeland is on Showtime, which, as you also don't know, is a CBS affiliate, and therefore CBS, of course, covered the thing wall to wall. And they brought on Rupert Friend, who's one of the stars of Homeland, if you watch the series. He's a British actor. And, of course, he was there basically to pimp this CBS series, and he was supposed to say what a great season is coming up and stuff like that. And interestingly enough, apropos of the American attack on Syria last night and all this stuff, when they started to ask him about the season finale, instead he completely turned the tables on them, and he started to quote from a Wilfred Sassoon, Wilfred Owen's poem about the terrible tragedy of people pointlessly being killed in World War I. And, well, you know, it's live television, and when you get a guy on that starts doing that kind of stuff, it's very difficult, because he's the big star and it's their big series, it's very difficult for, you know, Charlie or Gail to lean across the table and say, hey, shut the fuck up, right? Richard, when you were on television, I'm sure you had this issue all the time. When you went live, you never really knew what you were getting into. But in this case, it was fascinating to watch, because it didn't only go on for a second, it went on for several minutes. And he read the whole poem. The poem, which I brought with me, and I may read before we finish here, is Dulce et decorum est. What makes it fascinating is not only a powerful piece of anti-war poetry, but it also has bits of Latin in it. I haven't heard Latin on CBS This Morning since ever. So, and I don't know how much their audience really resonated to the Latin or to the poetry. But it was one of these really interesting moments in which television is confronted with real reality. I mean, the Owens poem is about real people dying in real wars. And, of course, Homeland is about a make-believe country having make-believe wars. And the confluence between the two was fascinating. But more interesting was to watch the hysteria in the control room. Must have been unbelievable. And they didn't really know what to do, because the thing just went on and on and on. And so all they did was they cut to cutaways of Charlie and Gail and Nora, and they just sat there sort of going like, they were suddenly lost. This reminded me of one of the best moments I ever saw in television in my entire life, and I've been watching this thing for a long, long time. One of my favorite writers and the most influential writers in my life is Neil Postman. And he wrote this seminal book that completely changed my life called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And if you haven't read it, it's absolutely, positively required reading. Anyway, when the book first came out, and we're talking about probably 40 years ago, the Today Show had Neil Postman on as a guest. I don't think they have writers on anymore. I think they just have TV stars and personalities. But they had Neil Postman come on to talk about his new book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. Well, the premise of Amusing Ourselves to Death is that television is probably the most destructive thing that ever came along, because everything has to be entertainment and fast, fast, fast. Now this, now this, now this, now this. And there's never any time to digest or think about anything. So in this probably 4-minute spot that they carved out in the second or maybe third hour, if they're doing the third hour, then Bryant Gumbel, who was the host, a former sports guy, who was the host of the show, turns to Neil Postman and says, Professor Postman, he asks him some first question, and the camera cuts to Neil Postman, and Neil Postman goes like this. And he stays like that. He sits like this for, it must have been a minute or two, which is excruciating, just like this morning with the poetry reading, is excruciating real-time television. And finally, Brian Gumbel turns to Neil Postman and says, very nervous and obviously completely flustered, not knowing what to do besides go to a commercial break. But it was the guy's first question. He turns to Postman, he says, Professor Postman? And Postman goes like this, and he goes, I'm thinking. Of course, that's the one thing you're not allowed to do in television, particularly live television, is to think. So in this moment of, it was a fantastic commentary on the medium, and it was almost like a piece of performance art when Brian Gumbel says, Professor Postman, and Postman is sitting there just like this going, I'm thinking. He's really making a statement that thinking is the last thing that you're allowed to do in television. I thought it was the last thing you're allowed to do in television, but now I realize it's the next to last thing you're allowed to do in television. The last thing you're allowed to do in television is to read World War I anti-war poetry. Because the reaction on CBS this morning was, and I liked it. I like Charlie's a very nice guy. I think Gail is great. I think Nora's great. I watch the show every day. But their reactions to having some guy rattle off 2 or 3 or 4 solid minutes, I think he must have memorized it. It was a very impressive piece. But to rattle off this piece of heavy anti-war, and I don't even say it was the political thing, anti-war and beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful piece of poetry incorporating Latin. It was priceless. I don't think they're ever going to have this guy back on the show again, and I don't know what it's going to do to the ratings. But to me, I mean, I don't really see CBS or anybody, even PBS, doing the poetry corner in the future. But it was a fantastic moment of television, and really as evocative and powerful a statement now as Postman made 30 or 40 years ago when he refused to talk in Simply Thought, because you could see that this is not how they believe television is supposed to work. So if you haven't read the piece I wrote on thevj.com, I urge you to take a look. TheVJ.com, it's a great place to go under VJ World. And if you haven't joined up and learned something about video literacy, then I urge you to do that too. If not, just have a great time and be sure to tune into CBS This Morning. It's the best morning show on television. It's the only intelligent one. So thanks for tuning in. See you later.